I trusted. I believed. But one incident opened my eyes. It completely changed my world forever. The outcome will shock you. Listen carefully to the end. I had just finished stacking the kids' lunch boxes on the kitchen counter and flicked off the hallway lights when I saw it. Selene, moving like a shadow near the fireplace. I stood still. Her back was to me, shoulders tight, movements practiced but twitchy, like she'd rehearsed them a dozen times. She slid something behind the thick mahogany frame of our wedding photo. She didn't know I was there, didn't even turn around. The moment lasted 3 seconds, maybe 4. Then she walked away like nothing happened. I didn't say a word. By morning, when our youngest had curled up in the blanket fort I built and the dog was snoring softly under the kitchen table, I moved silently. No breakfast chatter, no sound but the low creak of the wood floor. I eased the frame forward. Behind it, wedged in a slit of insulation, was an SD card, unlabeled. No dust on it. It was recently placed, deliberately hidden. The military teaches you to look at every detail, every silence, every subtle misplacement. This one screamed. I didn't take my phone, didn't grab breakfast, I just left. Drove the 15 miles to base without a single station playing. The tech lab was empty, only Franklin was there, and he owed me favors from 2 deployments ago. I dropped the SD card on his desk, and before he could even raise an eyebrow, I told him to run it through the decryption node with the brute force module on standby. It took 15 minutes. The files weren't locked well, encrypted but with outdated protocols, not government grade, more like third-party Merc Group sloppiness. What loaded made my stomach twist. Fractured audio logs coded with identifiers I hadn't heard since my deep dive days. Call signs, agent routes, offshore accounts, Burma, slush fund transfers routed through collapsed banks in Mandalay, a list of alias names, some highlighted in red. And then I saw one. VIC-07 Larson. I froze. 5 years ago, Larson went missing during a deep shadow run in Southeast Asia. I'd written the report myself. Body presumed incinerated after a fuel depot fire. Dog tags returned via a ghost channel. But the body was never recovered. We were told to move on. Officially, he died a hero. But that name, it wasn't on some dusty archive debrief. It was listed here. Active, in circulation. I copied the files to a black drive, encrypted again, and burned the logs. Told Franklin I was doing a deep cover continuity review for an op. He didn't ask questions. He knew better. Driving home, my hands didn't shake. They never do. But I couldn't get the thought out of my head. Why hide this in our home? Why behind our wedding photo? When I pulled up to the driveway, Selene was outside, smiling at our daughter while she chased the dog in circles. Nothing about her looked out of place. No flicker of guilt, no sign of deceit. Just normal, domestic perfection. But I'd seen the card, and that was enough. That night, I sat with her on the porch, watched the sun dip low past the treetops. She leaned her head on my shoulder like she always did. Told me she missed the old us. I nodded and held her hand. We laughed about something the dog did earlier that day. And when she kissed me goodnight, I kissed her back. Then I went to my office and activated the dormant tracker on her phone. My fingers moved like muscle memory as I typed out the first encrypted log entry since I left active service. I activated 3 burners, routed comms through Seoul and Cape Town, and pulled 2 former sources out of the shadows. Singapore, Penang, Chittagong. I slept 2 hours that night, and when I woke, I wasn't a husband anymore. I was an operator again. The morning stayed the same, at least on the surface. I made waffles, packed lunch, read a book to our youngest while Selene braided her hair with a kind of absent tenderness that only looks real if you don't know better. But underneath it all, the house felt different now, like the walls were listening. I didn't confront her, not yet. I needed her to believe everything was still intact, that I was still the man who stopped being dangerous the moment he became a father. I kissed her forehead, told her I'd be home by 6, and walked out the door with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. At night, once the house went still, I didn't sleep. Instead, I turned our guest bedroom into a control hub. lined the walls with old maps and tacked photos above them. Places Selene had traveled for work over the last 2 years. There were overlaps, patterns, points that lined up not with her career, but with dead drops I'd seen used before. She was moving intel. Each night I stayed up a little longer, dug a little deeper. Every third hour I'd patch together fragments from the SD card, trace financial flows, reroute signals, and compare network pings from Southeast Asia. I brought back a source from a port town in eastern Singapore, one who used to run unregistered crypto wallets for us during deep black contracts. The guy was nervous, said people had started disappearing, said old names were being whispered again, names that should have stayed buried. 2 days later, I noticed something missing. The safe in our bedroom, hidden behind the drywall panel, was slightly off kilter. Nothing obvious, unless you knew how flush the edges used to be. I opened it and counted everything. 2 passports, our original marriage license, a burner USB with a kill code protocol I'd shelved 5 years ago. But the physical keys were gone, specifically the one to our secure lockbox in Munich. It contained backup access credentials to an old operations account, buried and scrubbed clean. Selene had taken it. I felt my chest go still, not from panic, but focus. It had taken me years to bury that asset trail. If she had access to it now, there was only one explanation. She knew who I used to be. She had played a longer game than I'd thought, so I set the next phase in motion. I wired tiny mics into our bedroom frame while she took the kids to her mother's. Took 20 minutes. Everything ran through a secondary loop buried beneath the floorboard insulation and into a backup hardline in the garage that could only be accessed via thermal remote. I waited. On the third night, she spoke. Her voice was low, but clear enough. She wasn't alone. I recognized the sound of her friend, Erica, from the gym. They'd worked together at one point, but I always suspected Erica was more than she seemed. She was careful about her cadence, about how she spoke around me. Jason used to be brilliant, Selene said. Now he's just a father. He's soft. Erica laughed. Good, makes it easier. Then came a name that nearly stopped my heart cold. Larson. It wasn't spoken in memory. It wasn't about closure. She said it like he was alive. Erica whispered something I couldn't catch, and Selene responded with quiet confidence. He's different now. He won't see it coming. The audio ended there. I listened to it 7 more times, each pass peeling another layer off the woman I thought I knew. My former partner, the man I buried in my past, wasn't dead. Larson had gone dark, and now somehow he was circling my life again, through her. The next morning, I submitted a formal request through unofficial channels for forensic confirmation on the Larson case. It went to a friend in archives, someone I once pulled out of a hostage situation in Manila. He called me 20 minutes later. There was never a body match, he said. DNA was partial. Dog tags were faked. They buried a body, but it wasn't him. I stared at the ceiling above my workstation, trying to feel something. Rage, betrayal, confusion. But there was nothing, only clarity. I tracked down the morgue log tied to the Larson case and pulled the old photos from the burn folder. The man in the autopsy file wasn't Larson, not even close. Wrong cheekbone structure, no service tattoo, fabricated identification from a deceased operative who died years before. Someone had staged Larson's death, and someone had used that fake death to disappear him. Selene wasn't just cheating on me in the marital sense. She was collaborating, facilitating, living 2 lives, one as my wife, the other as something colder, something buried deep in the intelligence black channels. I issued a code quiet request for passive surveillance on my own house. No HQ notification, no official trail, just 3 freelancers I used during the South China Sea op. They owed me, and more importantly, they knew how to vanish after watching without being seen. The next morning, I told Selene I had to leave on assignment. I packed a bag, kissed her like I meant it, told the kids I'd be back by the weekend. Then I drove 10 miles outside town, circled back, and headed to the old observatory. The one we used for recon during the dry season fires a decade ago. Still off-grid, still stable. I powered up a remote thermal lens and pointed it toward the house. For 2 hours, I watched nothing but ordinary life. Then Selene left. She didn't drive her usual route. Instead, she took the back road that looped down past the edge of the water treatment facility. 20 minutes later, a second vehicle approached the house. Not Larson, someone else. He wore civilian clothes, but the angle of his walk, the way he scanned the horizon, the way his jacket shifted when he moved, it all screamed training. Embedded insignia flashed once beneath his collar, the emblem of a black ops unit that had been disbanded 6 years ago. A unit I once fought beside and watched fall into the shadows after half their team flipped for profit. Selene knew him. She didn't flinch when he stepped into the yard. She smiled, and then they disappeared into our home. I didn't move for 20 minutes after they vanished inside. Just sat in the observatory, the thermal lens trained on the house, 2 heat signatures, Selene in the kitchen, the stranger near the hallway. They never touched, never even entered the same room. That meant control, separation. This wasn't romance. It was tactical. At 11:42 a.m., they left. He exited first. She waited, then followed in a separate car. They'd done this before. I followed him. No hurry, no tracks. My engine masked. His vehicle was civilian plane, but the plates, ghost-coated. They belonged to a car used in a failed Jakarta arms drop 4 years back. Old equipment, recycled tags. Someone inside was helping him stay buried. He parked near the dam. The woods looked abandoned, but I knew better. I'd used this area once, years ago, for recon drills. Good place to disappear. He walked in. I waited, then moved. His car was unlocked. Amateur mistake. On the seat, a paper map, red marks trailing a route along the river. At the end, one word, drop. I took a photo and got out before leaving a trace. That night, I was the husband again. Joked about school fundraisers. Ate dinner like nothing was wrong. But while Selene laughed at something our daughter said, I saw her hand twitch. Her shoulder was too still. The mask was slipping. By midnight, I was in the garage, decrypting again. The SD card fragments had more. Emails, financial logs, alias hits. One name came up, Myra Jessen, Selene's, tied to a Zurich rental linked to an old smuggling front used by ghost units. It was sloppy, almost arrogant, like she didn't care if I knew. I brought in Mom, an analyst who owed me, told him to dig, to look into Larson. His answer came in 3 lines. No body match. Dental equals no. Scar pattern equals wrong. Subject classified, phantom echo, secure your perimeter. That hit harder than I expected. Not the warning. The term phantom echo. A redacted label reserved for operatives who'd gone rogue but were too valuable to eliminate. I swept the house that night. Kids asleep, rooms normal. But our bedroom? The curtain cord was reversed. The throw pillow on my side, flattened. They'd searched the place. Not stolen, just checked. Like they were looking for something. That's when I knew. They didn't trust I'd stayed quiet. So I went deeper. I laid new wires, passive mics in the headboard, vents, smoke detectors, all routed to a hardline loop. No wireless, no pings, just raw feed, saved to encrypted storage in the garage floor panel. I waited. On night 3, Selene's voice came through. Soft, sharp, talking on the phone. Not to a friend. He's checking routes. I don't think he suspects you, but he's active. A male voice, distant, filtered. He still think Larson's dead? Yes, but not for long. She laughed, low and bitter. Jason was brilliant once. Now, he's too far gone. He believes in family. He won't do what he used to. The call ended. She came back to bed, said she loved me. I kept my breathing even. Next morning, I called in one last favor from archives, had them pull the Larson morgue files. They came in an hour later. I opened them with steady hands. Wrong body, wrong scars, wrong identity. They'd planted a corpse and burned the records. Larson wasn't dead. He'd ghosted, vanished, and Selene had followed him into the dark. But I still wasn't sure how close he really was. So I requested thermal surveillance. Not on the stranger. On my house. Not cameras. Not motion sensors. Just heat. Biometric patterns. I didn't want faces. I wanted movement. I wanted proof of how long they'd been using my home, and I wanted to know if Selene ever waited until I was gone to let Larson in. The drop point on the dam wasn't active yet, but it would be. The man from the woods hadn't left that map in the car by mistake. No one that careful makes sloppy errors without meaning to. It was bait, either to flush out surveillance or draw me in. I took the risk anyway. Spent the next 48 hours prepping for a confrontation I didn't want, but knew was coming. I intercepted their car just before dawn on a service road flanking the dam's eastern spillway. A blind curve gave me cover. I watched the thermal feed pulse as they approached. 2 signatures, calm, unaware. I cut their engine remotely. EMP burst. 1 clean hit. Their lights flickered and died. Selene stepped out first, confused but composed. She looked different in the daylight, more military than maternal. Black boots, tied-back hair, cold posture. She didn't see me right away. The man followed, hands clenched, reaching under his jacket. I came up from the tree line, silent, 2 photos in hand. I slapped them down on the hood, one from our wedding, the other from the SD card. A list of compromised agents, names scratched out in red. I didn't say a word. Selene stared at the images. Her lips parted slightly. She didn't speak. Her face held no panic. Just that same quiet calculation I'd watched build behind years of fake smiles and date nights she'd rather skip. But the man broke. He turned fast, rookie mistake, and tried to run. I put a single round through his thigh, non-lethal, but messy. He collapsed with a scream that echoed into the valley. Selene didn't flinch. She just looked at me like she wanted to ask a question, but knew the answer wouldn't matter. I got behind the wheel of their car and left them in the woods. Didn't tie them up. Didn't warn them. If they wanted to bleed their way out, they could. By the time I pulled into the driveway back home, the sun was cutting clean lines across the yard. The kids were still asleep. I moved through the house like a ghost. Every photo on the wall a lie. Every memory sharp around the edges. I went to their rooms and left something small for each of them. A gift I'd planned to give them next month. It felt important to give it now. Then I left a note for the nanny. Nothing dramatic, just a change in schedule. Work had come up. I'd be out of town a few days. Keep their routine steady. They didn't need to see what was coming. At the office, I submitted a formal report through encrypted lines, redacted names, sanitized descriptions, just enough to trigger interest, not alarm. I wasn't hunting for recognition. I was buying time. If HQ knew too much too fast, they'd shut it down, and I needed this open. While the report filtered through channels, I got to work building the real case. Not as a husband, not as a father, as what I used to be, a shadow walking alongside a system designed to forget you when you're inconvenient. Through an old darknet contact, I found something I hadn't expected. Larson wasn't just alive. He was thriving, running operations for a privatized military intel firm. Off-grid, off-record, a shell company that paid in minerals, not money. They were feeding intel to the highest bidder, reactivating defunct satellites, pulling old agency ghosts back into the field without the oversight. Larson was the brain. Selene was the bait. She'd been setting up their new identities, using my clean record, my house, my face at the parent-teacher nights to hide in plain sight while their network spun around her. And I, an old relic with a security clearance and a pension file, had made the perfect cover, until I didn't. I activated one last contact in Marseille, someone I hadn't spoken to since we staged an extraction under sniper fire in Rangoon. She ran comms for a silent signal branch, and if Larson was buying silence from the inside, she'd know who he bribed. She sent back a single line and an image. A transaction, digital, time-stamped. Selene, a casino in Geneva. She hadn't even tried to cover her trail. The moment I saw that name, Casino Valet, I smiled. That was my ground. The last op I ran before burning my ID was staged in its vault. Every camera, every corridor, I knew them better than the floor staff. If she was there, she was exposed. I booked a flight under the alias Jeremy Steen, one of the last IDs I had that wasn't flagged. 2 days later, I walked through the casino's revolving door like I'd never left. Selene was at the roulette table, alone. She wore a black dress that used to mean something. It didn't now. She saw me and froze. I sat across from her. "This is our final round," I said, and then her face exploded in red. Paint, not blood. My mark. My call to the takedown team. Chaos broke around us. I didn't blink. Larson tried to slip out through the rear service hall, exactly what I'd hoped. He ran right into Agent Wolf. She wasn't supposed to be there. I hadn't seen her since Iraq, when I'd pulled her out of a compromised safe house. She owed me. She collected. 3 minutes later, Larson was down. Selene vanished in the noise. I didn't chase her, not yet. That night I returned to the hotel, laid my weapon down, and stared at the city lights. For the first time in a month, I took a breath without weighing it, but I didn't sleep. I knew the next step wouldn't come in daylight. The cleanup in Geneva barely made a ripple, just another high-roller scuffle painted over with PR gloss. No one asked questions. No one ever does when the right palms are greased and the right footage is erased. I vanished before the ink dried on the local reports. Selene was gone, but not lost, because now I knew where she was going. The surveillance team I'd seated weeks ago had eyes on the Zurich unit she used for her European base. She hadn't returned there, but her burner pinged briefly, 20 seconds, off a signal tower 30 miles north of Bern. She was bouncing signals again, routing calls through black net servers, using layered proxies, but she'd slipped. Just once. It was enough. I left Switzerland on the third day and touched down in Berlin under a new name. Used the embassy as a ghost pass to move through clearance faster. From there, I contacted Victor, the one man I never wanted to owe again. He used to work in dead drop logistics, selling identities to people who needed to stop existing. We'd burned his facility in Bangkok after one of his clients turned out to be a deep cover trader, but Victor survived, and he remembered who spared him. He owed me. I asked for a trace, not on Selene, not even Larson. I wanted the satellite keys, the ones that went missing from a shuttered intel relay years ago. During the same quarter, Larson's body was recovered. Victor paused when I said it. Then he laughed. "You're late," he said. "They already sold one key. Myanmar. Second one's in motion. Zurich account. Your wife moved the trigger funds. Trigger funds, not just blackmail cash, kill money. The second satellite wasn't for monitoring. It was for coordination. Dead drops, agent retrievals, assassination routes. Selene was about to become untouchable, unless I moved now. I returned stateside under an old agency alias, used a derelict customs port to slip in unnoticed. 2 days later, I walked into my own neighborhood like a stranger. Same trimmed lawns, same recycled smiles. The street was calm, but the air felt wrong, stale, like something had been here and left a trace. I entered the house from the rear, quiet, methodical. Every lock had been changed, but not well. I bypassed the security system in under 3 minutes. They weren't expecting me back this soon, or maybe not at all. The house was still mine, legally, but everything inside had been scrubbed of me. Wedding photos gone, my boots from the entry closet gone. Only the kids' rooms were untouched, like she didn't dare erase that part. But what froze me was the hallway. There were new footprints in the carpet, military boot prints, measured spacing, identical pressure, tactical precision. Someone had swept the house, and they'd stood in my son's doorway. That was the only room where the door had been touched, barely ajar. Fingerprint smudge. Someone had watched him sleep. That was the moment I stopped thinking like an operative. I started thinking like a father again. Selene had exposed the kids to whatever storm she dragged home, and that changed everything. I left the house immediately, swept my vehicle, and relocated to a cold site upstate. Used burner gear to reping the Swiss accounts. She'd made another transaction, this time in Marseille. But this one was different. It wasn't to move money, it was to buy silence. A hit list. 4 names, all tagged containment priority. My name was at the bottom. The others were former operatives. One was already dead. I contacted the remaining 2, both off-grid, one in Morocco, the other living under a fake identity as a mechanic in Detroit. I warned them, sent them copies of the transaction log. Neither responded, but I saw activity spike on their encrypted lines that night. They knew what was coming. Selene had crossed a line she couldn't walk back. This wasn't just betrayal. This was the dismantling of an entire history. Everything we built, everything we bled for. And now she was trying to cut it clean at the root. So I hit back. Not with weapons, with truth. I leaked fragments of the original SD card into an anonymous data pool we used to call the graveyard, a place where information never really died. I didn't name names. I didn't expose agents. I only sent one message. Phantom Echo is not dead. Zurich is active. Check the list. The data pool was monitored by a dozen burned handlers, all desperate for redemption or revenge. I knew they'd act faster than any agency, and I knew someone would see Selene's name and remember her face. Within hours, the graveyard responded. One phrase. A code from an old op no one should remember. Echo bleeding. Reaper inbound. That meant someone was coming for her. Not me. Someone worse. But I wasn't ready to let her go just yet. Not until I understood why. So I contacted her, just once, through a device I hadn't used in years. A classified comm tablet tied to a shortwave frequency only she would recognize. I typed 5 words. Where did we go wrong? No signature, no trace. Just the weight of everything between us packed into one simple question. She responded, 3 hours later. It wasn't supposed to be like this. And then she went dark. But in that moment, I felt something crack inside her. A hesitation, a regret. It was the first human thing I'd heard from Selene in months. But it was too late for that, because now the Reaper wasn't the only one coming. So was I. Geneva had been surgical, Berlin had been quiet, but the next move wasn't going to be either. Marseille wasn't just where Selene had made her last transaction. It was the center of her erasure protocol. She wasn't running anymore. She was cleaning up, severing ties, killing the ghosts who knew her real name. And if I didn't move fast, I'd be next. I hit the tarmac under gray skies, dressed as a logistics courier, low profile and forgettable. No weapons, just a briefcase rigged with tracking gear and 2 biometric locks keyed to my pulse. If I died, the case would go dead too. That was the insurance. I didn't go to the account office directly. Instead, I went to the casino. Casino Valet. That place was a snake's mouth disguised as a palace. Everything gleamed too clean. No clocks, no mirrors, just polished stone and perfume and people who'd forgotten what real fear smelled like. But I hadn't. Not even close. She was already there. She didn't see me at first. I took my time. She sat near the poker tables, posture relaxed, eyes alert, dressed in gray, the color of control. Her wedding ring was gone. She laughed at something a stranger said. Her face never cracked, never hinted that just days earlier she'd left a bleeding man in the woods and whispered my name like a eulogy into a cold line. I let her see me on purpose, made eye contact from across the floor, and for the first time, she looked afraid. Not panicked, but afraid. I crossed the casino in 12 slow steps and sat across from her, the weight of a decade of lies between us. She opened her mouth to speak, but I didn't give her the chance. This is our final round, I said, and that's when the paint hit. Red, brilliant, splattered across her face from the ceiling rig above. My signal to the off-grid takedown team. My mark, non-lethal, a warning, a claim. The room gasped. She flinched, not from pain, but from the sudden collapse of control. She was no longer invisible. Larson moved faster than I expected, slid out the back exit like smoke. But I had guessed his route. Wolf was waiting. Agent Wolf hadn't been in the field in 4 years. Last I heard, she'd vanished into deep recuperation after a blown cover job in Venezuela. But I saved her once, long ago, and when she heard who Selene was working with, she didn't hesitate. She took Larson down clean. Knife work. Close quarters. It was over in 45 seconds. By the time I made it to the back hallway, he was already bleeding out under plastic sheeting. He tried to talk, said something about orders, that he was saving us from ourselves. I didn't care. He died with my name on his lips. Selene, though, she was gone. Slipped out during the chaos, but not far. I found her 2 hours later, holed up in a bolt flat above a bakery in the old port. She hadn't run. She was waiting. She let me in. Didn't reach for a weapon. Didn't plead. just watched me with that same unreadable stare. The one I used to think meant passion, but now I knew better. It meant calculation. She looked thinner, more tired than I'd ever seen her. There was no furniture, just a mattress and a duffel. Passport, cash, burner, false IDs. She said nothing at first. Then, was it always going to end like this? I didn't answer, because part of me didn't know anymore. I looked at her, really looked, and wondered if I ever knew her at all. She had been a handler, an extractor, a manipulator of men and systems. But she had also been the mother of my children, the woman who once traced circles on my wrist just to feel my heartbeat. Both couldn't be true, could they? You were my home, she whispered, before I remembered who I really was. That was the wound, not the betrayal, not even the affair, but that. She had used me as her disguise, her shield. She never stopped being a ghost, and I had built my life around the illusion. I didn't kill her. I didn't need to, because I'd already taken everything she was trying to protect. Before I left Marseille, I activated the second part of my plan. I traced her remaining accounts through the last Zurich fund, rerouted every dollar into a sealed beneficiary trust under our children's names, burned every ID linked to her aliases, sent a quiet flag to the graveyard, just a number. Echo 1 locked. The takedown team would handle the rest. By the time the sun came up, Selene was officially declared missing. No body, no record of her arrest, just gone. Like Larson, like the truth. I returned home a week later, changed every lock, burned the wedding photos, donated most of the furniture, bought new plates, new cups, everything smaller, more compact, only kept what mattered. In my son's room, I found a drawing pinned to the wall. Crayon, a crude superhero with no cape. Underneath, in shaky handwriting, "Dad is a superhero. He doesn't need to fly." I stared at that for a long time. Then I smiled. For the first time in months, it was real. Fall came early that year. The air over Virginia turned sharp overnight, the trees burning with color like the last gasp of something pretending to stay alive. I'd gotten used to early mornings again. School runs, scrambled eggs, pouring cereal without looking while my mind ran tactical recon on everything that moved outside our windows. Selene's name had been erased from every system that mattered. Her trail scrubbed, bank accounts bled dry, safe houses torched or reclaimed. The graveyard went silent. That meant they were finished with her, one way or another. No body, no headline, just silence. That was the only real execution in our world, when no one remembers you existed. But some echoes don't fade. I still checked the cameras once a week, still ran passive surveillance on the neighborhood. The kids thought I was overprotective, and maybe I was, but I couldn't afford not to be, because Selene knew things about me that even the agencies had forgotten. She knew my redundancies, my fail-safes. She knew how I'd operate if the world fell apart. And that meant she might try to get ahead of me before it ever did. Then came the letter. No return address, just a plain white envelope in the mailbox tucked between a coupon flyer and a dental reminder. I opened it on instinct, fingers steady, mind already braced for poison. It was handwritten. Jason, you're probably expecting a final confession or an apology. You won't get either. You already know what I did and you understand why. Better than anyone else ever could. The truth is, I didn't kill us. You did. You just took longer to realize it. We were ghosts before we were lovers. You told me once that your scars made you stronger. But you lied. You never healed. And neither did I. We just hid it behind bedtime stories and grilled cheese and pretend anniversaries. But I want you to know, the kids were never a mission. They were the only thing that was real. Don't come looking. I'm already gone. So I read it 3 times. Then I burned it over the sink. There were no tears, no explosion of emotion, just a sick, cold understanding that she'd been watching, quietly, subtly, long enough to find a way to send that message without triggering any of my fail-safes. She was out there, still breathing, still moving through cracks in the world, and now she wanted me to know she'd chosen the shadows again. That was fine, because I had made my choice too. I retired from the agency that week, quietly, no fanfare, left behind a thumb drive filled with evidence no one wanted to look at, and a resignation letter 3 sentences long. My handler didn't call. They knew not to. Instead, I went home, picked up my daughter from school, and helped my son build a model rocket in the garage. We laughed when it broke in half during liftoff. We rebuilt it. Then I started writing down everything. Names, dates, operations, burn lists, things I swore I'd never say out loud. I buried the drive in a safety deposit box registered under my son's name. If anything ever happened to me, he'd find the truth. Not about Selene, about me, the things I did, the man I used to be. Because the truth wasn't about revenge. It was about legacy. The kids deserved better than ghosts. One night, weeks later, I sat on the back porch with a blanket around my shoulders and a glass of something that burned just enough to make the cold feel honest. I watched the stars flicker like dying satellites, and for the first time since it all began, I thought about forgiveness. Not for her, for me, because I let it happen. I saw the signs. I chose peace over suspicion, love over instinct, and in doing so, I gave her everything she needed to destroy me. But she didn't. She walked away instead, and that was the last gift she ever gave me. The night before Selene disappeared for good, my youngest daughter left a note outside my door. In shaky handwriting, "Mom says you're the strongest person she ever knew." I didn't ask when she said it, or how. I just folded the note and placed it beside the drawing my son made months ago, the one with the capeless hero, because even if the world burned behind us, my kids still saw me standing. That's all for now, folks. Thank you for being with me today and listened. And if you liked my story, please subscribe, hit the like button, and comment below what you think about all this and what would you do if you were me. Also, don't forget to check my other stories in description below.